listeners, welcome to another exciting episode of Loss of Lieutenant. I'm your host Josh, and I'm joined by fellow host
Nick.
Much easier with just two people. Welcome to our episode 109 of Loss of Lieutenant, where we're talking about we're continuing our Back to Basics series, where we discuss concepts that might be foreign to new players, and you know, it's just an interesting discussion to bring back some veteran players to get back familiar with the basics of the game and not get swept up with internet drama.
Try to cover some of the kind of basics and just after basic skills that kind of are lacking out there in tutorials.
Yeah, that is true. They do tend to sort of skip over some of what we would consider a core skill in the game. Today we're going to be talking about explaining unit profiles. This is not the how to tell if a profile is good or not. It's more about if you're facing up against a new player or a person who's not super familiar with what your army does, how you can give a quick 15-second overview of your units and the unit profiles, and also just a little like recap of what makes a unit profile, or what the important things in a unit profile is, which has been skillfully collated and crafted by our resident statistician Nick.
Not too many stats on this one, but
well, you know, there's at least 10 per profile, so
fair. Yes, that type of stats, not the calculation stats.
Yes, exactly. All right, but first things first, little catch up. How you doing?
So since last time, we've had a slow grow league going and got to go to 2 tournaments for the slow grow league. Took Assassins, which I haven't really played before, and after the first tournament, which was 4 rounds in a day, I went second the first 3 of them, and by the end of the day was feeling a bit more like I understood how to play a Fide, which was fun.
By the end of 3 rounds, or 4 rounds, 3 rounds.
Yeah.
7 rounds.
Yeah.
Now.
Because I normally would try to put the Fide in some sort of like, I'm going first, let's alpha strike an important piece, and didn't have that option because I went second for almost the entire day. And so having to force myself to go, well, where do I put this where it's going to be as annoying as possible and eat up as many orders as possible for them to get rid of it. So my favorite one was going into Varuna, I believe, and there was I'm blanking on which one. One of the like medium infantry multi-snipers linked up, and had another Heelot. That was wait.
Yep, Kamau and
yes,
Heelot.
Heelot. Yeah,
Yep.
Camille and Heelot. Yes, thank you. And dropped the Fide in the middle of a rooftop, where it was looking at both of them and would template both of them if either of them moved.
Well, that's good. That's a 25-point mine that you can actually place in trigger area.
Yes. Although we also found out that 16-inch deployment zones at 150 points have some issues.
16-inch. Surely there are only 12 inches at the big ones.
No, there's Cutthroat is 16 inches still at that size.
At that size?
Yeah.
That seems ridiculous.
So I ended up infiltrating Delamy, not over-infiltrating, just infiltrating, and they started in shotgun range of some of his...
Yuck. I think someone maybe read the table wrong. The table measurements wrong. I'm fairly certain it's 12 on Cutthroat, but in 150 points. But I could be wrong. I have been known to be wrong before, many times. I've been caught out.
Oh,
on this
sorry, it
podcast.
is 12.
Yeah.
However, the table is so short
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
that there's such a small zone in between that
There's only
just regularly infiltrating, I could shotgun stuff in his
There's
deployment
only
zone.
8 inches between
Yeah,
the deployment
yeah.
zones. Yeah.
It's 4 inches to the other side, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Infiltration into shotgun ranges, amazing.
Yeah.
It's rare that the Dale Army shotguns come into play, but they do.
On that size table, I don't think I fired a single Panzerfaust, but they definitely killed stuff with the shotguns.
Well, I mean, that's what Panzerfausts and shotguns do. So,
yeah. So what have you been up to?
Not a huge amount, unfortunately. For the slow grow, I have I've been working on every day that Tristan's organised the slow grows, but I should be around for the 300 points, which is fun. Get to bust out some torchlight. Other than that, I have played a couple of games, well, like one game a week over the last couple of weeks. I've been testing out some torchlight lists. When I say lists, I mean list. I'm finessing a Jamie Arantes alpha striking guard unit list with with a plasma rifle. Turns out she's a lot of fun, and also Nimrod, really good. I'm loving Torchlight, so I'm keen to get them more on the table, and I'm keen to get the models whenever they arrive in Australia, and paint them up in whatever scheme that I can cook up. It's basically me. I haven't been doing too much. A lot of video editing.
Yeah.
A lot of video editing. All right. So the current challenges. It is as of recording, it is the 26th of March, which means it's coming up to the end of the quarter. We might leave these open for another couple of weeks just to tack these onto the this episode onto the end of the quarter, so we can just round out anybody. I'll put a reminder up on our socials for people. But our current challenges are the first one is a quarter one gaming challenge. Make them an offer they can't refuse. We've had a transition to longer form gaming challenges. We'd like to set a real challenge for our listeners. We want you to get organized and run it and plan an event for your local players and tell us about your experience. If you tell us about the event and give it a real fun name, I'll even put it on our socials for people all across the world to see and maybe come along if they're in the area. This isn't necessarily an ITS event. Just a group of people playing 3 games in your garage will fulfill the requirements of the challenge. Custom missions, resilience ops, reinforcements, free play, mercenaries. I heard about a new one on the recent Whip 12 podcast, which was, I can't remember what it was called, but it was just an 8-player, they called it Hunger Games, 8-player battle royale with 3 units. That sounds amazing. Do that. Fantastic. Tell us about your experience. They're all some of the ways that we enjoy Infinity, so bust them out as well. Submit your entry as a Google Doc to us at lostoflieutenant@gmail.com, and a random winner will be selected to win a small box set of their choice from a retailer to be determined.
Yes. And then our Q1 quarter hobby challenge for 2024 is New Year, New Me. New Year's means the next round of tournaments, which, if you're anything like Josh, means a new army. This quarter's freeform challenge. Show us something that you have started and finished this year. Can be a model you're excited to get on the table, a display board, or even some terrain, some nice buildings. Whatever it is, we'd like to see it. Send your finished entry along with progress pictures as a Google Doc to lostlieutenant@gmail.com. And one random winner will be selected to win a small box of their choice from a retailer to be determined.
Just a reminder that if you like what we do and want to support us, you can do so for $3 a month at patreon.com/lostoflieutenant. If you can't commit financially to support us, we get it. Times are a bit tough. Just let Aleph know you like us by liking, following, and leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts and on the YouTube channel. Please don't let my learning video editing go to waste. It's a new skill. I'm old. Let me have this. Join our Discord as well. Invite link is in the episode description.
So, upcoming events, we have Arcfinity, which will be the 27th, 28th of April at Sandown Racecourse in Melbourne. So just about a month. 300 points with a painting requirement. Has to be fully painted and based. Superiority, Frostbite, Acquisition, Mind Wipe, and Cutthroat is the mission lineup, and tickets are available through the ArcFest website, which will be in the link in the description, and you can see it on the slides as well. Following that, we have Border Bash, which is 8th 9th of June in Lavington, New South Wales. So at roughly Albury Wodonga area. 300 points, looking at a mission lineup of Power Pack, Acquisition, Evacuation, Supplies, and Frontline. And you can find more details on the Facebook event page for that.
Cool. Let's jump, without any further ado, I think we should jump into the main topic of
Sounds good.
Explaining unit profiles. So I think that we should start off our segment with a little bit of a disclaimer.
So, yes, disclaimer on this. These are our opinions. These are some ways that we like to group units, unit profiles to make quicker descriptions of them. There are many, many other ways you can group them together. Experiment, find out what works best for you and your local meta.
Tell us.
Because I'm sure someone will want to comment that one of the nicknames I have for the groups isn't a correct term, or something like that.
Engagement, baby. If I get something wrong, tell me. Please, comment it. I want to know.
Yes.
I'll respond. Probably. Maybe. I will. I promise.
Okay. So, basically, why is this a skill that Infinity players need? Infinity has many, many unit profiles, and there are far too many for most players to have memorized all of them. And not everyone plays every army.
Not everyone can be me. And just read the army app for fun.
Yeah. So this will both help new players that you play, or, for instance, at our Slow Grow League, I went up against someone who was running some of the new O12 stuff, and went, "This is a something something," to which I had to reply, "I have no idea what that is. Could you please explain it to me?"
Yeah, and so there's a lot of online discourse about what an optimal profile is, and so we thought it'd be a good way to empower new players, especially those new to Infinity, about how to tell your opponent what's going on in your list, what's going on with a profile, and if it is a weird and wacky thing, just to avoid that kind of, you know exactly what I'm doing because it's the most optimal thing, or I'm not playing something that's super optimal that's not widely talked about. You'll be able to just explain it very, very, very quickly. So, and plus we've got a little bit of tidbits in here about how to bring these up at the table, what's useful and what's not useful, and all that kind of gunk.
Yep. So, goal of this is figure out how to explain a unit profile to your opponent in 15 seconds or less. There's limited time, especially during a tournament, and the more time you spend explaining the profile is less time you spend playing.
Yes, we've all been prone to the first round going into lunch because deployment takes too long. And I've heard of IGL games going for 4 or 5 hours because you kind of get a bit time blind when you're sitting at your computer playing on TTS, and that just does not spark joy in me at all. So, yeah, a nice quick explanation of a unit profile is excellent.
Yep.
And what's our baseline?
Yeah, so basically looking at find a baseline for that type of unit. So start with what type of unit is it? What are its important stats that set it apart from that type of unit? What's it like in CC, because that's usually a self-contained group of units. And then how do you prioritize telling them what weapons, skills, and equipment it has? So looking at, obviously all the stats are relevant to something. However, if you're trying to convey the most important ones to your opponent, priorities are going to be ballistic skill, armor, BTS, and if it's got multiple, the wounds. Almost never comes up is going to be size, unless you're talking about, is it exactly how tall is it relative to this cover, or the AVA, unless you're playing against Val, in which the question is, are you sure you could have that high of an AVA of Yugons or Yanyons?
Or is one of those Yan-Yans actually three Bashi? It's three of those Yan-Yans actually Bashi Bazook, and it's
Oh, I played him in Slowgrow, and it was two Bashis and three Yan-Yans, I think.
Right.
At 150 points. I think he was one of the few people who had two battle groups at 150 points.
Yikes.
So, some of the other ones depends on the model, really. Close combat, we've got a whole section on that. Fizz, usually not that relevant unless it's going to be linked to something else. So regen, or if it's quite high, that'll influence their ability to dodge. So the difference between an average trooper dodging on 10s to 12s versus if you've got some warbands up there who are dodging on 15s, that becomes relevant. Same with the whip. Pretty much it's relevant to specialists, but the main one that your opponent's going to know about is the whip on your hackers, since that's face-to-face. Can also be courteous to point out if you have a very small possible pool of models that have the same whip that you rolled for the starting roll, to note which ones have that whip when you're describing the different models.
You're more than welcome to omit that information unless your opponent asks that, but
correct, yes.
But that's more tournament play than casual play, and that comes with its own sort of can of worms and kettles of fish.
Yes.
Or kettles of worms and cans of fish, depending where you're from.
So, when we talk about the baseline stats, one thing to remember, a couple of factions have bonuses or penalties to those baseline stats. Ariadna has one higher Fizz as its baseline. When we refer to most things have combi rifles as default, they just have rifles. Their BTS is basically a foreign concept of the faction. Hawk gets +1 to their whips and replaces combi rifles with rifles and light shotguns. And Pano gets a bonus to ballistic skill and a penalty to whip. So when we talk about what the expected stats are of a basic profile, keep those in mind.
Yeah, and there's obviously, this only covers this little thing. Tidbit only has 3 out of the 9 vanilla factions. The other one, Aleph combined, Tohar, O12's a little bit Pano-y, I guess, except they don't take the negative to whip. Tohar's wacky and wonderful. So is combined. So is Aleph. Yep. Aleph's basic line trooper is a Dakini, which you couldn't measure against you couldn't measure against a Fusilier in any way, shape. So it's important to note that these are just sort of variations of the basic line trooper.
Yeah. So for instance, we left off Yuqing because +1 close combat skill on a line trooper, it is basically meaningless.
Ariadna and like Hack also have tend to be religious. Pano tend to have no extra skill. Ariadna tend to be sort of terrain jungle or terrain mountain or something.
Ballistic skill is Pano's faction skill.
There you go. And Yujing have courageous units in their line infantry. Maybe I don't think Xanshi.
I think they start with dodge +1.
Dodge,
but then they get courage a lot more.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, JSA has courageous line infantry. That might be it. All right, unit types.
Start with the unit types. Start with looking at the basics light infantry. So, if you're telling someone this is a light infantry, the baseline stats you can kind of assume from there is 4/4 move, ballistic skill 11, It might have a point of armor, it might not. It might have BTS, but probably doesn't, and it's going to be 1 wound. Two examples of that, you got the Zanshi, the Aguacelas. When you start to get into the more expensive light infantry, they tend to then act like other things. So a fair number of them start to act more like skirmishers, but we will get into skirmishers later. Medium infantry is, I've probably gone on the record to say this before, it's weird, in a weird place, design-wise, in Infinity. There's not a whole lot of space left right now between light infantry and heavy infantry. But for medium infantry, kind of look at very similar to the light infantry, ballistic skill more like 12 or 13. They've usually got a fair, more than a flak jacket of armor, and sometimes some ballistic or BTS as well. You almost have to kind of link that specific medium infantry you want to talk about to a different type of model, since medium infantry doesn't really do much to define itself. So you can get stuff like elite light infantry, which is like the Zayden, who will jump in with the Ghulams, bring a nice heavy weapon with them. Ones that are almost or practically heavy infantry, like the Grenzer or the Sombra, who have, or Sombra specifically with NWI, its stat line looks like a non-hackable heavy. You can get models that are kind of on the heavy side of skirmishers, so like the Prowler, and then there's pretty much everything in between. Medium infantry is a hard one just to define, so it's easier to link that to its role on the battlefield or a different type of infantry that it's more like.
All right. Yeah, medium infantry are a weird thing. Definitely a stark upgrade from their M3 presence, being when they were primarily characterized by 4-2 movement, which was odd considering they got basically no bonus for it. Maybe a little bit of extra armor. Moving on. Heavy infantry.
Heavy infantry has a very wide number of kind of subtypes, I guess you'd call them. When you're talking about heavy infantry, one of the things that comes up is the base movement, because that is either going to be 4-4 or 6-2, and that doesn't really have a standard movement value for different types and different roles of heavy infantry. That tends to be more by the army, or sometimes appearing a little random as to which get which. So regardless of what type of heavy infantry it comes out to be, definitely need to talk to your opponent about how quickly it's going to be moving across the board. So I broke it up into 5 different categories. Your budget heavy infantry. So this is going to be your ballistic skill 13, armor 3, BTS 3, 1 wound, and NWI. So not true 2 wounds. They tend to be the ones that have more tools than other heavy infantry, tend to act more like skirmishers. So things like the Evader, Zensha, or like Jansi and Rindak. So ones that bring a bunch of skills, a bunch of equipment, and can be that midfield button presser or the midfield gunfighter, while still bringing a second wound and a decent amount of armor.
Yeah, they tend to be sort of medium infantry +1.
Yes.
Rather than true heavy infantry, because they're a lot of the forward deployment things. And it's obviously just in a bid to sort of curb the power of having true 2 wounds in the midfield and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely a good idea to have a distinction between the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and being midfield specialists, they do have the downside that they are hackable, which can either dissuade you, or you want to try to stick to the ones with stealth, who can at least walk through repeater networks without being frozen.
And you can tell something's hackable by the little symbol underneath the regular order. It's got the hacking profile or the hacking program symbol, the sort of like three-forked trident pathway programming kind of symbol.
Yeah, it's the USB symbol.
USB symbol, there you go.
Yeah.
My USB ports say USB. So yes, it's the USB symbol is your this unit is hackable symbol. So keep that in mind that some, despite being valid targets potentially for hacking programs, normally the lack of that symbol means that they are unhackable. Case in point, some of the heavy infantry in Ariadne are heavy infantry. They are not quite true heavy infantry. They're probably more like those medium infantry +1. We're talking like your Highlander Greys or your Caledonian Mormares or your 13e Moblo.
A lot of the ones that said I could have more wounds or I could just stack more armor.
Yes, yeah. Well, yeah, the Mormare is just a dude who's just strapped a bunch of armor plates to himself and was given a HMG. So yes, they are unhackable heavy infantry. So it's important to look out for that symbol, or to let your opponent know that symbol exists, because they could execute an attack with a pitcher or whatever, and try and isolate your Mormare, and then you inform them that the last 4 orders that they spent doing that are wasted. So yeah, it's important to let your opponent know that, and to avoid that sort of negative player experience.
Yeah. So the next category I have are the line trooper heavy infantry. So the baseline for true heavy infantry with 2 wounds. So similar to the budget ones, ballistic skill 13, armor 3, BTS 3, and with 2 full wounds. They tend to be more of the kind of basic troops that fill out the heavy infantry sectorals. So think like Jujak, Riot Girl, Teutonic Knight. They are full 2 wound heavy infantry, but don't really have any frills beyond that.
Yeah.
Then you get to the regular, what I call regular heavy infantry. So the ones that are heavy infantry and definitely spent the points to be a full heavy infantry. So ballistic skill getting up to the 13 to 14, getting past that 3 armor in the 3 to 4 range, BTS in the 3 to 6 range, still with 2 full wounds. Look at like your orcs, janissaries, hollowmen, suryats. So ones that you feel like their faction invested into the armor and it wasn't just the mass-produced like Jujak suit.
Despite the Jujak bringing probably more skills than a Janissary to the table, but
that's not yes, that is true, probably.
But Janissary's a PS14, so
yes,
you win some.
Yeah, Janissaries have the one advantage that when you like, what are their stats? It's probably 14.
Yes. Yeah. What's next?
Next is what I say, like the elite, so the premier heavy infantry. There's like ballistic skill 14 and up, at least 5 armor, 6 BTS, 2 wounds if not more. So start getting to the 2 wounds plus NWI models. The ones you kind of look and go,
wounds, Achilles.
Yeah, are you sure this isn't a Death 5 or kind of into the like almost mini tag type of range? So for this, we're looking at more the Knight of Justice, the Hacktow, the Asura, kind of the army defining pieces. It can fill the same role as a mini tag. It's and my mind just went blank. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, like, you know, they're sort of like hard hitting, skill stacking pieces. They sort of sit around that sort of between 30 and 80 points.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
The things that you can, they're kind of like if you're taking a heavy armor piece that you build around heavy infantry.
Mhm.
Sometimes they're linkable, sometimes they're not. And the ones that are linkable tend to be sort of powerhouses in the faction.
Mhm.
And then you've got your super heavy
Yeah.
infantry.
Yeah. Then you've got your S5s. So back to your 13 to 14 ballistic skill, but in the armor 5 plus, 6 plus BTS. Same 2 wounds with some of them having a third NWI state. These are typically your gun platforms. Don't usually link as much, and if they do, they're typically duos or heresies. Uh, so your Azraels, your Chrysoporax, your Sogorats.
Your primes.
Yes, your primes.
You've got to mention the prime. Outstanding.
Yeah. So heavy infantry tends to have a lot of. It's probably, I almost say it's one of the more broader um, unit types as far as being able to divide it up nicely into many different groups.
You kind of get with your line infantry, you kind of get your line infantry and then your characters, which are just your line infantry plus a few extra skills.
Mm-hmm.
With your medium infantry, you might get up to the sort of like the lowest of the lows are basically line infantry with the medium infantry label tacked onto them.
Yeah.
And some of them you get basically heavy infantry with the medium infantry tacked onto them. They once run such a wide gamut that you could probably just cut medium infantry and make them all either line infantry or heavy infantry. But they've already got a unhackable heavy infantry thing. Maybe medium infantry needs to go, or there needs to be we'll see. N5, maybe there'll be a distinction again about medium infantry.
I think they almost need to follow like the Sombra and just allow medium infantry and heavy infantry to overlap in design space.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to make them distinct.
You've got that clear distinction, which is the extra effective, the extra wound, but also the like EM being more effective against heavy infantry, potentially being hackable. Heavy infantry comes with that. You pay that price for having power armor, and that price is it's technology that can be hijacked.
Yeah. Speaking of hijackable technology, tags. So they kind of split into 2 categories these days: the S6, kind of the cheaper budget tags, and then the S7 main battle tags, with the one exception of the S8. Main difference: the S6s, you're either looking at the 6-2 move or 6-4, whereas main battle tags pretty much stick to 6-4, with a few exceptions. Usually have less ballistic skill possible on a budget tag, so the 13 to 14 as opposed to 14 up. They tend to hang out pretty well across the board at 6 armor, 6 BTS.
Yeah, I think the only real exception to that might be the Zeodron, which packs bioimmunity and has armor 5 BTS 6. So, they're basically all armor 6 BTS 6 if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and of course all tags. Well, I think all tags. I'm sure there's an exception. Or structure 3, unless you're Toha.
Wounds. Yeah. I think
then,
maybe is it one of the mercenary tags is less wounds? Is it the Anaconda?
The 2 escape system
Anaconda
tags are
is 2 wounds. I'm fairly certain.
Yeah, the 2 escape system tags.
Yeah, so that's the Anaconda and the Lizard.
I think Lizard.
I'm looking.
Oh, Iguana.
Iguana, that's the one. The Lizard's a good tag. Um, yeah. I don't even know
So
where the
the other
anatomy
things you
is.
can kind of, the other default parts of those are the ballistic skill attack +1 damage and attack aware. So if you're telling your opponent like this is a budget tag, uh, or just a tag at all, you can assume the +1 damage on BS attacks, the attack aware,
Yeah.
along with 3 structure.
Yeah, they're still acting as a main gun platform. They're just doing it from a more fragile, slightly more fragile frame.
Mm-hmm.
And then the MBTs.
Uh, so that, yeah, look at 6/4 move, BS 14, armor pretty much started at 8 up, and same BTS 6 up, and then the same basic tag skills uh, as the budget tags with the 3 structure, BS attack +1 damage, and attack aware.
Yeah, I think that you see
Mm-hmm.
the community mostly puts a main battle tag starting at 8 armor.
Mm-hmm.
Some S7 tags are fewer than 8 armor. I think the Oyuroi is 7, but most people don't sort of
Mm-hmm.
classify it as a main battle tag. And the sort of that main battle tag
Mm-hmm.
name, nickname, is attached to 8 armor or
Mm-hmm.
above.
Yeah.
But you could use it for any S7 tag, really. You know,
Mm-hmm.
your S6 and your S7. It's a clear distinction between the two. And then you've got the outlier and the Megariga Guard being the big girl that she is.
Yeah.
The one that we all
Although,
love.
other than being S8, skyline pretty similar.
Yeah, she's an S7 tag.
Yeah.
Like
A very wide S7 tag.
yeah, you know, you've got to pack all that baggage in somehow. And she's got the booty to do it. The junk in the trunk, as it were. Remotes.
Yeah. So remotes are one of the easy ones because there's so many universal remotes that are the same across all armies. You've got S1, Palbot, Helperbot, Slavebot, Yudbot, Nazmat, whatever you want to call that. The group of 4 S3 bots, so your Flashbot, Missilebot, TRBot, and then the Forward Observer or Toolbox bot.
The
And then
Tachimoto's from a couple of seasons ago, or last season. Season. Yeah.
And then the S4 Baggage Bot, the I wish it was seen more, TR Baggage Bot, and the Evo Hacker Bot.
Yeah, with exceptions, of course. The Red Fury Rafik and the Q drone having the mimetism, and the
I want to say the Evo for combined is on an S3 instead of an S4.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So because they're universal profiles, it's pretty easy to tell what they are. But when there are exceptions, they're important to bring up because people are going to just default to what the profile is.
Yeah, your total reaction.
There's almost no variety.
Your total reaction and Ariadna, they're all on S4s. There's no S3 bases in Ariadna. Yeah, there's a little bit of intersection in there, but you know this is able to provide a basic framework, and then you can work around that with whatever you've got. Luckily, they're taken few and far between, so that's okay. There are exceptions, obviously, to the Helperbot and Palbot as well. Obviously, in Toha and in Spyrocore, it's the Chaxa Auxiliaire or Chaxa Servant, which is S2 and 4/4. And in Ariadna, it's the S1 and 4/4 on the electronic bot.
Yes, the
Helperbot, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Robot.
Unfortunately, we've got the not so universal remotes, and honestly, there's so much variety amongst them that it's hard to generalize them beyond the basic remote rules, which is going to be remote presence, courage, immunity shock. Beyond that, pretty much just have to describe it to your opponent. there's not a whole lot of simplification you can do other than just walk them through it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the mainstays are kind of universally known. Like pretty much most people know what a Vostok is. Most people know what a Bulleteer or a Peacemaker is. If you're using something weird like I don't know, a Luduan or something, just explain to your opponent what it could be. Unless using Hollow Echo and Hollow Mask, then don't, because that's private. You can't see this.
For skirmisher and warbands, skirmishers tend to be more defined by their equipment and their skills more than their stats. So their stats can vary a bit more than the other types of troops. But they're typically defined by having forward deployment and infiltration, mimetism, camouflage, stealth. That helps divide them up into a couple of subtypes. I guess the three main ones, at least for me, are the midfield specialist. So button pusher, someone you can set up in a camouflage state up near a button and have it survive long enough to go push it quickly. Some midfield control. So I'm thinking like mines, repeaters.
If you're really strange and weird and wonderful and wacky, you can take a Dazer.
Yes.
They exist.
Yeah, so I'm thinking like Morans for those.
Yeah.
Where they're going to not do much themselves, but they're going to help you. They're going to get up there or they're going to deploy up and then start controlling the battlefield in their area.
Yeah. Morans, Initiated Observance, Guilangs, Striders, all those sorts of things. Gangbusters, the kind of quintessential midfield control pieces.
Yeah, the last one that I tend to loop in with the skirmishers are the fast, kind of like short to mid-range gunfighter. So that would be like Dart, Mukhtar MSV2, Red Fury. So stuff that's going to start up the board and has a decent toolkit, good protective skills as well, and wants to fight at closer distances by getting to the best vantage point and then attacking from there rather than trying to bunker up and clear from your deployment zone out.
You heard it here first, folks. Achilles version 2 is a skirmisher. And a tag. Joined. Warbands?
Yeah, warbands, kind of like skirmishers, they're defined more by their close combat abilities than just their pure stats. And it's usually easier to summarize how they perform as a close combat model rather than look at their individual close combat stats.
Yeah, they tend to be a little bit cheaper because they pack either the Frenzy or the Impetuous skill. They are also generally speaking a army's choice of army's source of smoke, irregular orders, and yeah, those close combat specialists that are just going to work their way forward, hopefully, and do their nasty stuff to your opponents. But they can be sort of a bit of everything, and they can go from one wound, awesome pieces, one wound pieces like, I don't know, bikes like Kum Riders or something, to two wound gunfighters like a Wolvers in Caledonia. Run the whole gamut of profiles.
Yeah. So speaking of close combat abilities, so especially if you've got a model that you're getting close to the opponent or your opponent's getting close to you, want to know, so what's that model like in close combat? So I typically break this down to 5 different groups. You've got your baseline that no one cares about. So close combat, if under 18, pistol, close combat weapon, will fold like a wet paper towel if anything gets within arm's reach of it. uh, kind of the, I guess, thinking more like elite gunfighter, typically in the like can win a bar fight range, where they definitely have enough close combat they can
Brawler. Yeah.
reliably go after. They can reliably get out of a combat with someone who has no close combat skills. So kind of 18 to 21 close combat with no close combat skills. Uh, Heavy pistol, shock, para close combat weapon, something more than baseline, but not by much.
They might even have a like pistol +1 burst or something
Yeah.
like that in their profile, which makes them a little bit more reliable in CC, but definitely not going to be up against something that is a monster in CC.
Yeah, they're schoolyard bully.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine picking on the little guys, but as soon as someone shows up who actually knows what they're doing, they
folds
don't
like a
hold
wet
their
paper
ground.
towel. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So, kind of your mid-range ones that will actively see close combat. So that's your like CC 22, martial arts, maybe some other close combat skills. At least an AP close combat weapon, sometimes better. And this is kind of where most of your baseline warbands tend to fall.
Yeah.
So one that can reliably go through close combat against anyone who isn't a pinnacle close combat model.
Do you put high CC and just natural born warrior in this section, or are you?
Yeah, I would probably.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's sort of CC 21 to 24 and just pure natural born warrior. Wallace, for example.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Someone who can survive and likely win against a decent opponent in close combat,
yeah.
But that's not going to be their primary goal.
Yeah.
Yeah. After that, you've got your pinnacle, your close combat monsters, your CC 24, martial arts 4, AP plus DA, close combat. So your Odi Wabuns, your Lian Kais, your McMurrows, the ones that you just want to keep a nice safe arm's reach from them and not let them get close.
My favorite units in the game. Domaru, Shinobu, McMurrow, Oni Wildman. Yes. Put me in someone's face. Let me bring a sword to a gunfight and deflect bullets on my way in.
Okay. Your sword packs more explosives than their gun.
Yeah, well, you know. Not everyone can be Musashi.
So the final one is the ones that hunt the close combat monsters. So this is a much smaller pool, and these are the ones that have martial arts and NW, natural born warrior. So they're the ones who will shut off the opposing close combat skills, but still bring their own close combat skills. So not necessarily as well armed.
Also known as kind of bullshit.
Yeah, actually, I was kind of looking for. I put up Nahab as the first example, and actually had to spend a few minutes trying to figure out another example. So Chimera would be another one, where they will go into close combat with an Oi Waban willingly.
Yes, and reliably win the fight, and
yes,
you know, be 10 to 20 points cheaper than the Oni Wildman, and you know, allow you to laugh at your opponent when they go, what?
Yeah.
What do you mean I'm now CC 18 against your Chimera? That's not fun. Kids, it's not fun. You can tell that I'm biased, but that's okay. As long as we acknowledge our biases, they don't have any power over us.
I'm not sure if it works like that.
It definitely doesn't. I am as God made me, an insufferable weeb. Weapons, equipment, and skills.
Yeah. Oh my. So for weapons, kind of have to figure out, like, how do you prioritize what weapons you tell them that you have? So I typically start with, like, what's the model's go-to BS attack? Like, if they're going to shoot something, what's that main gun they're shooting it with? Do they have any direct template weapons? This is something that you definitely want to know about your opponent's models, so they definitely want to know about yours. Sometimes models will have weird secondary weapons, like emitters. Very important to know about those. Or zappers, as was the case in a game with Jock and I a few weeks ago.
Yes, that was fun.
And like area control weapons, so smoke jammers, especially like dasers, mines, stuff that.
Fair aware if you've got a particularly evil friend who wants to play Tohar against you.
Yes, yeah. Whereas most models will have, especially the lower end models, will have different weapons that no one really cares about. It's not worth your time to tell your opponent every model that has a pistol, every model that has a close combat weapon. I would even say it's not worth the time to mention like para -3 shock CCWs on a model that has no other reason to be in close combat. So
most
if
remotes have a para weapon -3. That's basically, and most line infantry have a pistol and a CC weapon. Like, it's not like close combat weapons. Melee weapons are widely variable, but also in that variation there is a median, and that median is pistol CCW.
Yes. Yeah. So for equipment, it's probably easier to discuss what isn't a priority dimension. So stuff that, like equipment that reveals when the model reveals itself, and then you don't really have to worry about it. Like Hollow Mask, specifically, one use and done. Hollow Echo and Motorcycle reveal themselves. So a model, when you is a motorcycle, it should be obvious from across the table, unless it's one of the weird transforming ones. Hollow Echo, similarly, there's 3 copies of the model on the table, and it's not something you probably have to convey because you've already conveyed it. Some of the more irrelevant equipment deactivators, they are scattered around, but I don't think I have ever seen them used.
I've used them.
Okay.
They're useful on against obviously outside of 8 inches. They're very useful on like mines, repeaters, things. If you just want to automatically remove something, have no mods except for your range mod, then they're useful. I used them more in last season because they were attached to the FO bot, the toolbox bot. You can just walk around a corner, discover on a +6, or you can just discover shoot a mine that you know is a mine. You just discover it, and then shoot it with a deactivator, and as long as you roll that 16 or whatever, because it's a technical weapon, then it's off the table. So no saves, just gets rid of all equipment. They have also a niche use against turrets, because turrets are deployable equipment.
Because turrets are deployable equipment.
Yeah, you can
hadn't thought of that.
You can get rid of their cover mod and everything, but you are still burst 1 against burst 3, so I wouldn't really do that unless you you absolutely desperately needed to do it.
Yeah.
If there was no other way that you could get rid of that, like you had a baggage bot around the corner from it, and that baggage bot can take it out with just a quick deactivator, that's the best way to do it. Which is, it's a neat little trick that can be used, but it doesn't come up very often. The only other thing that I would think about in this section would be biometric visor and maybe X visor. Those visors that aren't used terrifically often don't need to be mentioned straight away.
Yeah, I think your biometric visor probably doesn't. It's a low priority.
Yeah.
And X visor, I think it really depends on the model, because some models have X visors and absolutely use them, but if you're talking about like what Druze
Druze
for
use
their
them.
basic line infantry
Yeah.
with a combi rifle, the
I mean, the best part about the Druze is the
yeah
pitcher, X-Visor pitcher,
yeah you're looking more for the pitcher and
the
grenade
grenade launcher.
launchers, uh, versus X visor on a rifle is not like yeah.
An X-Visor on Sforza is very much not something you need to really talk about versus an X-Visor on a Ryukin.
Mm.
That's a useful skill. And then Cube. I like it on this.
Yes, yeah. Cube is equipment. If it ever comes up, and your opponent asks you what models are cubed, obviously after you tell them, since they asked about open information, you should then ask them how a Scepter works, because that's the if they're asked about cubes, the follow-up is a Scepter.
The follow-up is here's my one of 3 units in the game that has a Scepter. There you go.
Yeah. Similarly, with equipment, different specialists have automatic equipment profiles. So don't need to mention that your doctors and paramedics have med kits, your engineers have gizmo kits, your forward observers have flash pulses. With the med kit and gizmo kit, they do occasionally show up on models that aren't that type of associated specialist. So those are points to pick out. So first one comes to mind is Pandora, who
has a med kit +1 burst.
Is a hacker with a med kit.
Insane.
So good for them to know, because normally people ask for paramedics and doctors, while what they mean is paramedics, doctors, and med kits.
Oh, and hackers, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yes, and hackers. Don't need to go over the default programs for the hackers, because if it's a KHD, then your opponent knows exactly what that is, because it's in a table. However, if there's any modifications to that, as we're seeing more, I'd say more commonly these days.
Yeah, they tend to differentiate those sort of medium or premium hackers, medium infantry or premium hackers in the line infantry, by adding an upgrade to them. Then again, premium has a different word to it sometimes. For example, the Wave Riders, which are the new Torchlight ones, all have an upgrade. The most egregious example of this is probably the Dockerby. The Dockerby in Yuqing now has a killer hacking device with upgrade Spotlight, which is just a crazy, crazy, crazy set of skills.
Yeah, so you can kill the opponent's hackers and activate your missile bot at the same time. Well, same model.
Yes. So yeah, they are the upgrades tend to be a little bit more prevalent now, but it's just there to differentiate old hackers from new hackers, I guess.
Similarly with equipment for skills, it's probably easier to list the stuff that isn't really relevant if they're asking for profile information. So a lot of them are just automatically revealed. So when you deploy it on the table, you roll for booty and metachemistry. The fact that it has booty and metachemistry isn't relevant anymore because it never comes up. What they rolled is relevant, and is definitely important to add into the description, because that is going to be unusual even for that profile.
Hence
of whatever it rolled.
Asterisks there.
Yes. Yeah. There's other deployment options. So camo 1 use, similarly, you're never going to use it again. So once the model is in a state that they can ask what its stats are, it will never camouflage again. And then anything with special deployment, combat jump, parachutist, forward deployment, hidden deployment, infiltration, strategic deployment. By the time your opponent's asking what describe this unit, uh, its placement on the battlefield already tells them that it had forward deployment or hidden deployment, and it's not going to be relevant for the upcoming game.
I'd argue
Or
the strategic deployment's a little bit more relevant than that, just because it could significantly change the position of troops that your opponent thought were DZ bound. What comes to mind is Hannibal linking with bolts in 4Co. Means that you can put bolts 4 inches forward, which makes them 4 inches closer to you. And there might be a sublime sniper tower 4 inches out of your deployment zone that a bolt multi sniper can go straight on top of. Another one, there's a couple in Assassins. Yara
Hadad has strategic deployment.
Yeah, I've seen,
and is a wild card.
Yeah, I've seen Yara Hadad use that strategic deployment really, really well. So they're probably the 2 units that you're going to see it on. Not many people run the Rodok. I think it's the Rodok that has strategic deployment in Morats. There's not a huge amount of other strategic deployments in the game, but if your opponent's fire team is outside of their deployment zone and none of them have forward deployment, you can just quickly ask, hey, what's going on there? So sure, it might be irrelevant in the fact that you're never going to see them on the table, but it's definitely relevant in the in at the time.
Okay, yeah. My thought here was by the time your opponent asks for the profile, the models are already on the table.
Yeah.
But you do make a point of that would then explain why models that
don't have forward
deployment are in places that they normally wouldn't be.
Yeah. Hey, I didn't realize that bolts had forward deployment phosphor. The other one you got there is decoy. Obviously, if they're in a camo state and decoy, that decoy fizzles straight away. But if your opponent is being contrary to mainstream ideals and is running, for example, decoy helots.
Those do exist.
They do. Then showing when you have 2 helots outside of camouflage, it's important to note that this has the decoy skill. The one that you're going to see probably slightly more often than that if you're playing up against a Torchlight player is the new guard model that they have. Jamie Orantes has decoy, and it's quite well utilized. The other guard, the Nomad one, the Demonist, I think also has decoy. Does it? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Might have to look that up.
I can do it too. I think it does have decoy, which means that it's that's those sorts of things you're going to see, like, while not often, the fact that your opponents aren't going to see them as often as anything else, it's important to bring up that the decoy is a thing, and the decoy is an optional skill if their availability too.
Demonist. Yeah, Demonist, right?
Demonist of the Observance, whatever they're called. Demonist of Observant have decoy 1. Yeah, so obviously if they're a camo decoy, that fizzles as soon as the camo marker moves. But if they're not a camo decoy, then it's important to note that skill does exist when they're on the table. But that sort of goes into your next point there about what else is on the screen there for everybody to see.
Yeah. So again, stuff that it's automatically revealed before when the model is revealed. So camo, impersonation, sapper. I put sapper there just in. I don't know if there's any reason why you would not deploy a sapper in sapper state.
No, there's not any reason unless you are going first and you have a really nice sapper spot, but it's outside of the deployment zone and you need to get there. I don't see any reason why you would need to deploy a sapper outside of sapper. Yeah, it's a deployment skill for a reason.
Yeah. So with camo impersonation, my thoughts on that: by the time that your opponent can ask what the profile is, it's already been shown that they have camo or impersonation because they started in that state.
Yeah. Unless they're Jan starring you with a Kael'tar, which are more Toha words. You can see.
Yeah, maybe we should put Toha may be the exception in the disclaimer.
The Toha zone.
Yes.
To use a Rob Cantrell metric. What does need to be? Oh, this doesn't. Still doesn't.
Yeah. So, hidden skills, you, by the rules of the game, don't have to tell them unless it comes up. So, chain of command, counterintelligence, lieutenant. Ones that, in most games, aren't even, like, there's not even an opportunity to use it, like terrain. If the terrain type isn't present on the table, then there's no reason to waste the time explaining. Like, my Gulums all have terrain desert. Like, great, we're fighting the Arctic.
Hey, Antarctica's a desert.
Okay, fair point.
Hey, trivia with Josh, not Infinity related. Here you go.
The other one I called out, linked skills. So, for instance, surprise attack is pretty much default for any model that has a marker state.
Yeah.
There are exceptions of models that have marker states that don't have it.
Most killer.
But okay, yes, point.
Well, no, I mean that's just like there's an exception, and so you're right that most sort of skirmishes that have like a camo state or a hidden deployment or something will have the surprise attack label. It obviously is important to tell your opponent, if you're one of the few people in the world who runs AR, that they have surprise attack -6. Which is just such a sad thing to know. The only reason I know about that is because of this guy. And I think the sort of the other one there is just be careful of linked skills, especially if you're an older player who's used to nested skills. Because of the de-nesting of skills, it's hard. It's a good example is martial arts and stealth. While stealth used to be nested in martial arts, it is not anymore, which means not every unit with martial arts has stealth. Good examples are Datarazi don't have stealth. There's a few out there that don't have stealth, that sort of run screaming forward and go and yell while they're running. And they're very loud. So it's if you're an older player talking to a newer player, it's important to differentiate linked skill or skills that used to be nested and linked together to skills that are kind of linked now.
Yeah. Okay. Linked may not be the right.
No, I think linked is fine. Linked is a fine term. Yeah. No, because like surprise attack -3 has to come with a marker state. So you can't use surprise attack -3 without a marker state. So they're there. Even if it's useless on profiles like the Hellet. It still exists, but you don't really have to, mention it unless it comes up. Like, your opponent's doing the maths wrong, or you figure out something that they said was a crit wasn't a crit, or when that kind of stuff comes up, obviously you need to mention that surprise attack is a thing. But right off the right off the bat, saying that my ninja that just appeared has surprise attack probably is irrelevant.
So, had to put some skills in the at your discretion. Like, they're not the highest priority, or they're not the highest priority to know. And I say use your discretion. Basically, I think of it as, if I tell my opponent about that this model has courage and religious, is that going to be useful to them, or is it just going to waste time and give them more information overload when I try to give them the profile.
I mean,
So
I'm chronic for forgetting guts exists on the table. Because my first time it was JSA, which gets courage for free. So yeah, I never remember guts checks, but it's good to know sometimes.
yeah, so I do the kind of the gut skills, the courage, religious, because if your opponent doesn't immediately know that when they're looking at all the new models across the table, it's
okay.
not
Yeah.
game breaking. And as soon as that model gets to the point where they're starting to take firefights, or your opponent is specifically looking to try to,
Get them
I
to
would
put
use the
their
word
head down.
suppress, but making them duck, then that's quite relevant and should make sure that you can pass that information along.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of only important when it's outside of the norm. So, for example, Kisotsu are line infantry with courage.
Yes.
But Riot Girls are heavy infantry without courage. So it's those sorts of things are outside of the norm. So if your opponent is new to playing against that sort of thing and are trying to make something duck, like trying to make a Kisotsu duck its head down, it's not going to happen. Or if not that you would, you just blow it out of the water. Or if they're trying to I think the more reasonable one is if they're trying to make a concerted effort to kill a Riot Girl, say missile launcher, saying actually this model doesn't have courage, which means that I can it's probably just going to duck down as soon as it courage or religious. It's just going to duck down as soon as it stands up. And then conversely with religious, it's important to know, I think, what has religious, because you can force it to take fights that it might not want to continue having. So a good one maybe is if you've got a good beat on like a tick blang that's standing on a rooftop somewhere that could just guts climbing plus down to get out of dodge, then you can it's got religious, or the Montesa, at least the tick blang Montesa has religious, so it needs to roll that dice. Just examples.
So other things I put in here, like veteran, unless it is a hackable unit, veteran doesn't come up much short of lost lieutenant, because it's basically that and jammers and oblivion.
Fair away.
Yes. Unless you're playing as or against Toha.
Emitters, erasers, emirats, anything with the EM skill, EM ammo type will matter, but I mean, most of the time it's not going to. You're
right. Similarly, number 2, it's important when you're talking about the fire team, but may not be the first thing to bring up if they're asking about an individual model profile inside the fire team.
Yeah. Like we're saying about this is all caveated with user discretion. It's low priority. Yeah. It's if it's important to that fire team, then sure, go for it. But otherwise, don't bother.
Yeah, immunity shock, because similar to like with surprise attack being basically default for marker states, with exceptions that don't have it. Immunity shock is default for 2 wound models or NWI models, and then the exceptions don't have it.
A lot of the old characters that had NWI don't have immune shock. Korax Hashed, Wild Bill, all examples of models that had NWI's skill just as a premium I'm a character, look at me skill. They don't have immune shock, which means they just get immediately blown out of the water by an SMG, which sucks to them, but just how it goes.
Yeah. So bonus skills, like with heavy infantry, basically, you can leave that out just because it's a default skill for them, but it's the ones that don't have it then that are the ones that need to be mentioned.
Yeah, the exceptions.
Yes, the exceptions. I have remote presence here, and I think that went on a different slide. But similarly, remote presence, like immunity shock, for heavy infantry, remote presence is default for remotes. So if it's remote, unless it doesn't have remote presence or it's something that isn't a remote that has remote presence. Most common with that being tags, but those are kind of split between live pilots and remote presence.
Yeah.
So basic way we're to look at explain profiles then is what type of archetype is it closest to? So light infantry, medium, heavy, skirmisher, what type of battlefield role does it fulfill? So the midfield specialist, area control, how does it differ from that archetype? So for the heavy infantry with lower or higher armor than expected, light infantry that have a higher ballistic skill than expected. What are its close combat capabilities, which is kind of a like if applicable. And then going through its weapons, its skills, and equipment, prioritizing what your opponent will get the most out of in to try to keep it brief. So had a few examples. These will all be from Hawk because that's the one I usually am explaining. So for instance, Farzan, at deployment, my description it will be it's a MIM3 camo marker because that's all the information they get. But once it's revealed, then we tell them it's a Farzan forward observer, rifle light shotgun. It's a midfield specialist with BS attack shock, mines, and decharges, which covers what is it doing, what do you expect it to be doing, where do you expect to go, what are its special abilities. In that case, like BS attack shock on a light shotgun in the midfield, quite relevant. The ones that I excluded would have been religious troop because, especially with armor 0, BTS 0, it doesn't come up much. They typically are either alive or dead. Stealth, discussed it as a camouflaged mimetism midfield specialist. Left stealth out there because, given the role, it's fairly safe to assume that they have it, unless the opponent wants to specifically ask, or I'm doing something where it is specifically relevant. It's not something that is high priority for them to know immediately. Similarly, surprise attack is going to be the default ability for camo models, so it'd be more important to tell them if it didn't have it. And similarly, terrain total, if there's no terrain on the table, then it's never going to come up. And it's information that would just serve to work more toward overloading them as opposed to making them understand what the model is.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, the AR, as Josh mentioned earlier. So, at deployment, typically I would describe this as 3 basic Ghulams with rifle light shotgun. Because that's typically what I have extra bottles of, and it usually gets a laugh out of people who see 3 forward deployed Ghulams. Once it's revealed, we describe it as AR, breaker rifle, zapper, panzer, viral pistols, +1 burst. It's heavy infantry, it's a skirmishing gunfighter, BS-13, armor 3, BTS-3, 2 wounds, with spec ops, stealth, surprise attack -6, and drop bears. So in this case, because it is heavy infantry, I want to make sure that stealth is more relevant now, because does it get through a repeater network or not? Whereas the Farzan, if it walks through a repeater network, I might get spotlit. It's not a big deal, versus walking heavy infantry through, the opponent's going to want to know if they're stealthed or not for the repeater net. Similarly, did include surprise attack because it's the only model in the game with surprise attack -6, and don't really want to catch my opponent. I don't want my opponent to feel like it's a gotcha.
I mean, to be fair, I think when you're going to reveal it is when you're surprise attacking something. So
that is true. But the information was given to them at the first possible time that it was available.
Well, that's fine, and that's how Infinity's designed, and Infinity's designed around private information and things like that. So it's very reasonable.
So things that I wouldn't include, stuff like Hollow Mask, because if it was Hollow Masked, that's already over. It's never going to Hollow Mask again. Hollow Projector, it's already been revealed by them moving around as a group of 3 that is a Hollow Projector. So that's not new information for them. And in this case, I usually omit religious just for brevity because it's already a long description. And religious is a fairly low priority piece of information.
Yeah. And along with the CC weapon, it's excluded as well just because it's a CC
Correct.
Weapon.
Yeah. And final one, thought through it. One that doesn't deploy in a marker state. So at deployment, we describe it like Zayden HMG, BS attack 12 with marksmanship and BS attack shock. Medium infantry doesn't break the ghoul on pure link, or link purity, and regens on a 11 without shock immunity. So typically they're going to be deployed, or I would deploy them in a link or next to a link that they're not the same troop type with. So good to let my opponent know that yes, this does appear to be a pure link, whereas that isn't normally a stat because it's in the fire team's chart. Similarly, it has regen. At that point, the fizz is now relevant, and that it is a model that has a quasi second wound without shock immune.
If no wound in cap is 1.5 wounds, I think 1 wound in regeneration is like 1.2, 1.1, 1.099999 wounds.
With a fizz of 11, I think it's statistically more than 1.5 wounds.
I mean, not in... Ugh. Yes. I have 1 wound with a 55% chance of getting up at the end of my turn or the end of your turn, whichever one I choose to do. But also might get blown out by the exceeding amounts of shock that's in the game currently.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think I've regened a Zayden once. Yeah. And I don't mean successfully, I mean attempted.
I've regened a Speculo successfully once or twice. Same reasons.
Yeah. So in that case, excluded the veteran. Again, it's not relevant to the normal role that it plays. And if there's a situation where it starts to come up, like they start tossing pitchers my way, or they start to bring EM weapons toward me, then it becomes relevant and need to mention it.
So, final thoughts about explaining unit profiles.
It's a skill that develops over time, and it's going to also depend some on your playstyle and the local community, because different models are going to be played more. So if no one is playing tags in your meta, you're going to have to spend a longer time explaining a tag when you drop it down, because they may not have the knowledge base to refer to it as readily as someone who has lots of tags in their local meta.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a more utilized skill when you're up against a newer player than you, or someone who doesn't have a lot of experience. Most of the time, like, I don't really ask for, like, names will get me there most of the time, but I've played like over 400 games of Infinity against almost every faction. So I'm pretty happy with like most, and because I'm a huge nerd, read Army for fun. So it's definitely not a skill that I need to have like spouted back at me. But I appreciate people doing it as a courtesy, and also just to practice their own sort of handover skills, or communication skills about Infinity things to me, because it's definitely a skill that is important for everybody else out for most other players out there. Most other players out there. It's important to have that kind of skill down pat. And this is obviously not a be all and end all. It's a framework. Use this as a pro forma to, if you feel like it, use this as a pro forma as a guide of how to structure a little bit of a unit handover. I'm using very medical terms here, as a bit of a unit description, and you can just adjust it to your own style. Like, this is obviously not just this is just one opinion, or two opinions maybe, despite my interjections and biases. One or two opinions here, but yeah, you don't need to just follow this blindly. Use your judgment.
Yep. And you can also, depending on the opponent's experience, but also what they play, so what they're more familiar with, either playing by them, or what they put on the table, or what opponents they normally play. If they're not used to seeing, say, skirmishing heavy infantry, then a little bit more description there, but they should be fairly familiar with, say, line troopers, and can quickly go, okay, it's the basic line trooper, it's this faction, therefore they have +1 ballistic skill or shock immunity, and we know what the basic weapons do.
Yeah, I think it's another one as well is, if you want to be a little bit, if you want to take this sort of skill more into tournament play, and just be aware that if you explain certain units in a row, you might give away somewhat of your game plan. When I'm doing my unit explanations at the start of the game, I tend to, as soon as I've done my first deployment, just go left to right. And I go, this unit on the left here is this, then the next one along is this, next one along is this, next one along is this. And then roll that booty when you get to the Ermedino, or such and such, whatever makes sense for you. But just be mindful that you might give away something if you're playing in a tournament game and you don't want to reveal all that much about your game plan heading into the game. Just go left to right, makes it a bit easier, or right to left, whichever way you like.
Yeah,
that seems to be it. I think
so.
Bit of a quick one for you guys today. Recording's about an hour and a half, but I should knock it down to about an hour 10 probably with with edits. But it's all food for thought, and hopefully it can help you elevate your gameplay a little bit. So thanks very much for coming along and listening to us lyrically wax about explaining unit profiles. I've been Josh.
And I've been Nick.
Thanks for joining us, and good night, everybody.